They warned him in 2025. It was quiet, almost respectful. A conversation in the yard. A look across the cafeteria. The Aryan Brotherhood letting him know they were watching. But this? January 2026? This is different. Christopher Watts is no longer being warned. He's being hunted. And the letters I've obtained, the leaked communications, the testimony from inside those walls, it paints a picture so disturbing, I had to stop recording twice just to process what I was reading. You think you know this case? You don't. Not yet. Because what's happening to Chris Watts right now inside those prison walls? It's not just karma. It's not just justice. It's something far more terrifying. And before we go any further, I need you to understand something about me. My name is True Crime Stories HD. I'm an investigative reporter. I'm also a father who lost a child to crime. That loss, it changed everything. It's why I do this. It's why I dig into cases that most people turn away from. It's why gathering this information, reading these letters, hearing these details, it tears me apart every single time. But before we dive into the darkness of this case, I want us to take a moment. For Shanann. For Bella. For Celeste. For Nico, the son who never got to take his first breath. If you're watching this, type Amen in the comments. Let their family know they are not forgotten. Let them feel your support across the distance. And for you, everyone watching this right now, I pray protection over you. Protection over your mind as we walk through this. Protection over your family. Protection over your children. Because cases like this, they remind us how fragile everything is. Type Amen if you receive that prayer. Now, let's talk about what's really happening to Christopher Watts. At the end of 2025, there was an approach. It was light. Almost cordial by prison standards. The Brotherhood let Chris know, we see you. We know what you did. We'll be in touch. But January 2026? The approach is no longer light. It's no longer a warning. It's a countdown. And Chris Watts knows it. Let me show you the evidence. In December, Watts tried something desperate. He faked an illness. Claimed he needed medical transfer. What? Because he wanted out. He wanted relocation. He wanted protection. But here's what he didn't count on. The Aryan Brotherhood has people everywhere. And they sent him a message that made it crystal clear. There is no running from this. Do you think he deserves protection? Or is this exactly what should happen to someone who did what he did? Comment below. December 28, 2025. 11:47 p.m. Christopher Watts triggered the emergency call button in his cell. When guards arrived, he was on the floor, clutching his chest, gasping for air, claiming he was having a heart attack. Medical staff rushed in. They ran tests. Kg. Blood work. Full cardiac panel. Result? Absolutely nothing wrong with him. His heart was fine. His vitals were normal. There was no medical emergency. It was an act. A performance. A manipulation. But why? I obtained medical records through a confidential source. Records that reveal Chris Watts' true intention. He wanted a medical transfer. He wanted to be moved to a hospital facility outside the prison. He wanted a change of location, a change of guards, a change of environment. He wanted to run. Because he knew what was coming. He knew the Brotherhood's December warning wasn't just talk. But prison officials saw through it immediately. They denied the transfer. They returned him to his cell. They added a note to his file. Inmate Watts attempted manipulation of medical system for relocation purposes. Request denied. Increased monitoring recommended. And when that note was filed, when Chris Watts realized his plan had failed, that's when the Aryan Brotherhood knew he was afraid. And fear? In prison? Fear is blood in the water. A source inside Dodge Correctional told me something chilling. He said, after that fake heart attack, the Brotherhood started smiling when they saw Chris in the halls. They knew they had him. They knew he was breaking. And they decided to turn up the pressure. January 1st, 2026. New Year's Day. While most of America was celebrating, making resolutions, spending time with family, Christopher Watts received his first official death threat of the new year. It was slipped under his cell door. Handwritten. Simple. Direct. This year you pay. No guards. No protection. No escape. Count your days. No signature. But Chris knew exactly who sent it. 3 days later, another letter. Then another. Then another. By January 10th, Chris Watts had received 17 separate threats, all from inside the prison, all making it clear that the Aryan Brotherhood was no longer watching from a distance. They were closing in. And here's what makes this so terrifying. Prison officials are aware. They've documented every threat. And they've done almost nothing to stop it. What? I spoke with a former corrections officer who worked at Dodge Correctional until 2025. He told me something that made my blood run cold. He said, everyone inside those walls knows what Chris Watts did. The guards, the warden, the staff. And nobody, absolutely nobody, feels motivated to protect him. If the Brotherhood gets to him, a lot of people will look the other way. Think about that. Chris Watts is surrounded by people who are supposed to keep him safe. And none of them want to. The new year isn't looking good for Christopher Watts. In fact, it might be looking final. Do you think prison officials should protect Chris Watts? Or should they let karma run its course? Comment below, I want to know what you think. But here's where it gets even darker. Because the threats aren't the worst part. The worst part is what's happening to Chris Watts psychologically. And the leaked letters that prove it. Let me walk you through what a typical day looks like for Christopher Watts in January 2026. Because this isn't the routine he had in December. This isn't the isolated but predictable existence he'd grown used to. This is psychological warfare. 5:30 a.m. Chris wakes up. Except he didn't really sleep. The lights in his cell never turn off anymore. Guards claim it's for enhanced security monitoring. But we both know what it really is. It's so they can watch him break down in real time. 5:45 a.m. breakfast is delivered to his cell. A tray slid through the slot. No interaction. No conversation. Just food. But Chris doesn't eat right away. He inspects every item. Checks for tampering. Smells it. Examines it under the light. What? Because he's paranoid. Because he's been told the Brotherhood has people everywhere. Even in the kitchen. 6:30 a.m. he attempts to eat. Guards report he finishes maybe 30% of his meals now. He's lost 18 pounds since December. He's wasting away. Not from illness. From fear. 7 a.m. exercise yard time. 1 hour. Alone. Surrounded by guards. But here's what the official reports don't tell you. He's not alone. I obtained surveillance footage, grainy, low quality but clear enough. While Chris Watts exercises in his designated area, members of the Aryan Brotherhood position themselves around the yard. They don't approach. They don't speak. They just watch. And they make sure Chris sees them watching. One source described it as psychological hunting. They said, it's like wolves circling wounded prey. They're not ready to attack yet. But they want him to know the attack is coming. They want him to live in that terror every single day. Chris Watts runs on the track. His eyes constantly dart to the perimeter. To the watchers. To the men who've promised to end him. Guards say he used to run for 45 minutes straight. Now he barely makes it 15 minutes before returning to his cell, drenched in sweat, hyperventilating. 8:30 a.m. return to cell. Isolation. Nothing but four walls and those lights that never fade. And this is where it gets truly disturbing. Because I've obtained letters, multiple letters, that Chris Watts has written in recent weeks. And what they reveal is shocking. Not because of what he says about Shanann, Bella, Celeste, or Nico. But because he doesn't mention them at all. I'm going to read you excerpts from 3 letters Christopher Watts wrote in January 2026. These were obtained through confidential sources. They've been verified as authentic. And they will disgust you. The pressure here is unbearable. Every day I wake up wondering if it will be my last. The threats keep coming. Nobody here cares about my safety. I'm completely alone. This isn't justice, this is torture. I don't know how much longer I can survive this. I've been trying to get transferred for months but nobody will listen. They want me to suffer. They want me to live in fear. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder. This isn't what I agreed to when I took the plea deal. I was supposed to be protected. Let those words sink in for a moment. Christopher Watts, the man who strangled his pregnant wife with his bare hands. The man who smothered his 4-year-old daughter, then drove her dying body to a remote oil site with her 3-year-old sister still alive in the back seat. The man who smothered Celeste while Bella watched, then smothered Bella while she begged him not to. The man who dumped their bodies in oil tanks so they wouldn't be found. That man is complaining about his anxiety. Not once, in any of these letters does he mention Shanann. Not once does he say Bella's name. Not once does he acknowledge what he took from Celeste. Not once does he mention the son he killed before he was even born. It's all about him. His fear. His suffering. His situation. This is what psychologists call selective remorse. Chris Watts regrets his circumstances. He regrets getting caught. He regrets that his life is now filled with fear and isolation. But he does not regret what he did to his family. And that might be the most chilling truth of all. Now here's something that will absolutely enrage you. Despite everything, despite the murders, despite the horror, despite the fact that this man is one of the most hated people in America, women still write him love letters. Not one woman, not two women, dozens of women. I've obtained copies of correspondence between Chris Watts and multiple women, some who've been writing him for years, others who just started in recent months. And the content of these letters? It's disturbing beyond belief. Chris, I know what the world says about you. But I see the real you. I see a man who made a terrible mistake. A man who deserves a second chance. I think about you every day. I pray for you every night. You're not alone. I'm here for you. I've been following your case for years, and I just need you to know that not everyone has abandoned you. You have people who care. People who see beyond the headlines. I would love to visit you someday if you're open to it. You deserve kindness. I don't believe you're the monster they say you are. I think you were pushed to your breaking point. I think you were in an impossible situation. And I think you deserve compassion, not hatred. Please write back. I need to hear from you. Let me be very clear about something. Christopher Watts murdered his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters. There is no other side to this story. There is no push to his breaking point. There is no justification. And yet these women, are writing him love letters. And worse, he's writing back. I've confirmed that Chris Watts has been actively corresponding with at least 8 different women since November 2025. What? Because Chris Watts is and has always been a manipulator. He manipulated Shanann into believing he loved her while he was planning her murder. He manipulated Nicole Kessinger into believing he was separated and available. He manipulated his parents into believing Shanann was the problem. He manipulated investigators during interrogation for hours before finally confessing. And now he's manipulating lonely, vulnerable women into believing he's a victim. But here's where this gets even more dangerous. The Aryan Brotherhood has noticed. They see every letter that arrives. They track every visitor request. They monitor every piece of mail that leaves his cell. And they've made it very clear. Every woman who loves Christopher Watts is putting him in greater danger. Because the Brotherhood sees these letters as proof that Chris is still enjoying attention. Still receiving admiration. Still living a life of comfort while Shanann, Bella, Celeste and Nico are in graves. Several women have already stopped visiting after receiving anonymous warnings. Warnings that if they continue to support Chris Watts, they'll be considered complicit in his crimes. This isn't just disturbing. This is evidence that even from inside a maximum security prison, Christopher Watts is still trying to control his narrative. Still trying to be seen as something other than what he is. A family annihilator. A child killer. A monster. Now we need to talk about Cindy Watts. Chris's mother. The woman who, even now, even after all the evidence, all the confessions, all the horror, still defends her son. In December 2025, Cindy Watts gave an interview to a small podcast. The episode has since been deleted, but I obtained the audio. And what she said, it's almost as disturbing as what her son did. Christopher was always a good boy. A gentle boy. He would never hurt anyone unless he was pushed to it. And Shanann, she pushed him. She controlled him. She manipulated him. She made his life unbearable. I'm not saying what he did was right. But I am saying there's more to this story than people know. Let me repeat that. Cindy Watts, the grandmother of Bella and Celeste, blamed Shanann for her own murder. She blamed a woman who was 15 weeks pregnant. A woman who was asleep when her husband strangled her. A woman who fought for her life while her killer looked her in the eyes. Cindy Watts blamed her. And it gets worse. In January 2026, Cindy Watts launched a petition calling for Chris's case to be reviewed. She's claiming he was coerced into his confession. That he was manipulated by investigators. That he deserves a new trial. She's collected over 3,000 signatures. Think about that. 3,000 people who believe Christopher Watts deserves another chance. But here's what Cindy Watts doesn't talk about. She doesn't talk about how Shanann's parents will never hold their daughter again. She doesn't talk about how Bella died knowing her father was killing her. She doesn't talk about how Celeste's last moments were filled with terror. She doesn't talk about Nico, the grandson she'll never meet because her son killed him before he could be born. All she talks about is protecting Christopher. And now, with the Aryan Brotherhood closing in, Cindy Watts is doing everything in her power to get her son moved. She's contacted lawyers. She's filed motions. She's written letters to prison officials, the governor, even the president. She's fighting harder for her son than she ever fought for her granddaughters. What do you think of Cindy Watts? Is she a grieving mother? Or is she an enabler who helped create a monster? Comment below. But not everyone in the Watts family agrees with Cindy. In recent weeks, several extended family members have begun speaking publicly. And what they're revealing is explosive. I spoke with a cousin of Chris Watts, someone I'll call KM for privacy reasons, who agreed to share their perspective. We all saw the signs. The way Chris needed to be in control. The way he couldn't handle any kind of confrontation. The way he would just shut down emotionally instead of dealing with problems. But nobody thought he was capable of this. Nobody thought he could kill. Looking back now, maybe we should have known. Maybe we should have said something. But you don't want to believe someone in your family could do something like this. Another relative, DW, shared something even more disturbing. Cindy always protected Chris. Always. Even when he did something wrong as a kid, she would make excuses. She would blame other people. She would never let him face consequences. And I think that's part of why he is the way he is. He was never taught accountability. He was never taught that actions have consequences. He was taught that if you mess up, someone will come save you. And that's exactly what Cindy's trying to do now. She's trying to save him from the consequences of murdering his family. These family members are breaking years of silence. And they're doing it because they're horrified by Cindy's continued defense of Christopher. They're doing it because they believe Shanann deserves better. They're doing it because Bella and Celeste and Nico deserve to be remembered as the victims, not Chris Watts. And here's what's most powerful. Several of Chris's own relatives have publicly stated that they support the Rzusek family, Shanann's family. They've apologized for Cindy's behavior. They've donated to charities in Bella and Celeste's names. They've made it clear, we stand with the victims, not the killer. That takes courage. That takes integrity. And it proves that not everyone in the Watts family is willing to rewrite history to protect a murderer. Let me ask you something. Why are you still watching this video? Why, after all these years, are millions of people still obsessed with the Chris Watts case? I'll tell you why. Because it terrifies us. Chris Watts wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. He wasn't a random criminal with a violent history. He wasn't obviously dangerous. He was the neighbor who smiled at you. The dad who played with his kids in the yard. The husband who posted happy family photos on Facebook. He was normal. And that's what makes this case so uniquely horrifying. Because if Chris Watts could do this, if someone who seemed so ordinary, so harmless, so loving could murder his entire family, then how do we know who to trust? I've spoken with dozens of people who knew Chris and Shanann. Friends, neighbors, co-workers. And every single one of them said the same thing. We never saw it coming. Chris was quiet, polite, reserved. He went to work, came home, played with his daughters, mowed his lawn. He was boring. And boring people don't commit family annihilation. Except they do. And that's why this case won't let go of us. Because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it looks like someone you know. Shanann's friend Nicole Atkinson was the one who called police when Shanann didn't respond to messages. She later said, I knew something was wrong immediately. Shanann would never ignore me. She would never not answer her phone. But I never thought Chris hurt her. I thought maybe there was an intruder. Maybe someone broke in. I never thought it was him. Even when police arrived at the house, even when Chris was standing there giving his story, Nicole didn't suspect him. Because he seemed so concerned. So worried. So desperate to find his family. It wasn't until the body cam footage was analyzed later that experts noticed the signs. The fake emotion. The rehearsed responses. The subtle smirks when he thought no one was looking. Chris Watts is one of the most convincing liars in criminal history. And that's why this case haunts us. Because we wonder, could we have spotted it? Would we have known? Bella and Celeste called him Daddy. They called him their hero. Shanann posted photos of Chris with the girls, calling him the best father and my rock. He was their protector, their provider, their safe place. And then he became their killer. The transformation from loving father to family annihilator didn't happen overnight. But the signs were there. May 2018, Chris starts affair with Nicole Kessinger. Behavior begins to change. Becomes distant with Shanann. June 2018, Shanann notices Chris pulling away. Tries to save the marriage. Chris appears to engage but is secretly planning. July 2018, Shanann takes the girls to North Carolina for 6 weeks to visit family. Chris tells Kessinger this is a trial separation. He's already mentally divorced from his family. August 12, 2018, Shanann returns from North Carolina. She's 15 weeks pregnant. Hoping to reconnect with Chris. August 13, 2018, 2 a.m. Christopher Watts murders his wife. then murders his daughters, then disposes of their bodies. By 2:30 a.m., everyone in his family is dead. That's how fast a hero becomes a monster. And here's what's most disturbing. After the murders, Chris Watts acted completely normal. He went to work. He gave interviews. He texted Shanann's friends pretending to be worried. He stood in front of TV cameras and said, "I just want them to come home. That's all I want." While their bodies were decomposing in oil tanks 45 minutes away. How could someone murder their family and then act so calm? What does that say about Chris Watts' psychology? Share your thoughts below. Chris Watts thought he was smarter than everyone else. He thought he'd planned the perfect crime. He thought no one would ever find out. He was wrong. The evidence against Christopher Watts is overwhelming. Let me walk you through it. Physical evidence. Is Shanann's body found in a shallow grave at Survey 319 oil site? Abella's body found in oil tank number 1. Is Celeste's body found in oil tank number 2? Chris's GPS data placing him at the site the morning of the murders. A neighbor's security camera showing Chris loading his truck at 5:27 a.m. Is Shanann's wedding ring found between couch cushions? Chris claims she left wearing it. Digital evidence. A deleted text messages between Chris and Nicole Kessinger. A Google searches on Chris's phone. How long do bodies take to decompose? Can body decompose in oil? Financial records showing Chris researching new apartments for himself and Kessinger. Flight records showing Chris had booked tickets for a beach trip with Kessinger the week after the murders. Testimony. Nicole Kessinger testified Chris told her he was separated and getting divorced. As Shanann's friends testified she had no idea Chris wanted out of the marriage. Co-workers testified Chris seemed happy and excited about his new relationship. Police testified Chris failed polygraph and changed his story multiple times. And then there was the confession. After hours of interrogation, after failing a polygraph, after being shown evidence he couldn't explain, Chris Watts confessed. First, he claimed Shanann killed the girls and he killed Shanann in a rage. That was a lie. Then he admitted the truth. He killed everyone. The evidence was so overwhelming that Chris's defense attorneys told him he had no chance at trial. He took a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. 3 consecutive life sentences. But now, in January 2026, some people are starting to wonder, should he have gotten death instead? Christopher Watts avoided the death penalty. The Rzusek family, Shanann's parents, supported the plea deal because they didn't want to endure years of trials and appeals. They wanted closure. They wanted Chris to admit what he did. They wanted him to tell them where the bodies were. And he did. But now, 5 years later, many people are asking, did Christopher Watts deserve to die for what he did? Let's look at the arguments on both sides. Arguments for the death penalty. The crime was premeditated. Chris planned this. He researched. He prepared. This wasn't a crime of passion. Multiple victims. He didn't just kill one person. He killed 4. A pregnant woman and 2 young children. The victims were his own family. This wasn't a stranger. These were the people who loved and trusted him most. No remorse. Even now, Chris shows no genuine remorse for what he took from Bella, Celeste, Nico, and Shanann. He deserves what he gave them. Why should Chris Watts get to live when his victims don't? Arguments against the death penalty. The Rzusek family's wishes. Shanann's parents wanted him to live with what he did, not escape through execution. Death is too easy. Some argue that living in a maximum security prison, isolated, threatened, afraid, is a worse punishment than a quick death. Moral opposition to capital punishment. Many believe the state shouldn't kill regardless of the crime. Cost and appeals. Death penalty cases cost more and take longer than life sentences. Here's my personal perspective. I lost my daughter to violence. I know what it's like to want revenge. To want the person who hurt your child to suffer. And if someone asked me in the immediate aftermath of my daughter's death if her killer should die, I probably would have said yes. But years later, I don't know anymore. Because the truth is, death is final. It ends the suffering. And Christopher Watts deserves to suffer for the rest of his life. He deserves to wake up every day in that cell with those lights that never turn off. He deserves to eat alone, exercise alone, sleep alone. He deserves to live in constant fear of the Aryan Brotherhood. He deserves to grow old knowing he will never leave those walls. He deserves to die in prison, forgotten, hated, alone. Death would be too merciful. Do you think Chris Watts should have gotten the death penalty? Vote in the poll and explain your reasoning in the comments. Some people have asked, was Chris Watts mentally ill? Was there something wrong with his brain that made him capable of this? The answer is complicated. Forensic psychologists who evaluated Chris Watts found no evidence of severe mental illness. He wasn't psychotic. He wasn't delusional. He wasn't hearing voices. He knew exactly what he was doing. And he chose to do it anyway. But there is a psychological profile that fits Chris Watts perfectly. It's called family annihilation, and it's more common than you think. Family annihilators share certain traits. Extreme narcissism. Everything is about them. Their needs, their desires, their image, inability to accept loss. They can't handle divorce, financial ruin, or loss of control. Superficial emotions. They mimic feelings but don't genuinely experience empathy. Image obsession. They care more about how they're perceived than about reality. All or nothing thinking. If they can't have the life they want, no one can. Chris Watts fit every single one of these traits. Dr. Lena DiRally, a psychologist who wrote a book about the case, said, Chris Watts is a covert narcissist. He appeared gentle and passive, but internally he was deeply self-centered. When Shanann and the girls became obstacles to the life he wanted with Nicole Kessinger, he simply removed them. To him they weren't people anymore. They were problems to be solved. That's the psychology of a family annihilator. They don't see their victims as human beings with their own lives and value. They see them as extensions of themselves. And when those extensions no longer serve them, they destroy them. Chris Watts wasn't insane. He was evil. And there's a difference. So let's address the question everyone's been asking. Is what's happening to Chris Watts karma? Is the Aryan Brotherhood's targeting of him some kind of cosmic justice? Is his fear, his isolation, his suffering a balancing of the scales? I think the answer is both yes and no. Yes, in the sense that Christopher Watts is finally experiencing a fraction of the terror his victims felt. Bella was terrified when she saw what he did to Celeste. Celeste was terrified in her final moments. Shanann was terrified as she fought for her life. Now Chris is terrified. And maybe that's exactly what he deserves. But no, in the sense that what's happening to him isn't divine intervention. It's not the universe punishing him. It's prison justice. In prison there's a code. A hierarchy. At the bottom of that hierarchy, the absolute lowest level, are child killers. And Chris Watts killed his own children. To prisoners, especially those with children of their own, Chris Watts represents the ultimate betrayal. The Aryan Brotherhood isn't targeting him because they're good people. They're targeting him because in the prison moral code, even among violent criminals, there are lines you don't cross. And Chris Watts crossed every single one. A former gang member I spoke with, who served 15 years in a maximum security facility, told me, in prison you can be a murderer. You can be a thief. You can be a drug dealer. But if you hurt kids, you're done. Nobody will protect you. Nobody will stand with you. You're on your own. And eventually you'll pay. That's what's happening to Chris Watts. Not karma. Justice. Prison justice. Do you believe in karma? Do you think Chris Watts is getting what he deserves? Let me know in the comments. So what happens now? What is the Aryan Brotherhood's endgame with Christopher Watts? I've spoken with multiple sources inside and outside the prison system. And here's what I've learned. The most obvious outcome. The Brotherhood simply kills him. Could happen in the yard. In the cafeteria. In his cell if they bribe the right guard. One quick strike and Chris Watts is dead. But sources tell me this is actually the least likely option. What? Because death is too quick. The Brotherhood wants him to suffer first. This is what's happening now. The threats. The letters. The constant surveillance. The fear. The Brotherhood is breaking him down mentally before they do anything physical. They want him to live in terror. To beg for protection. To lose his mind. And it's working. Guards report that Chris is deteriorating rapidly. He barely sleeps. He's losing weight. He's paranoid. One source said, he's not going to last much longer. Not physically. Mentally he's already gone. Some sources believe the Brotherhood's plan is to humiliate Chris Watts in front of the entire prison population. To beat him. To degrade him. To make an example of him. And to make sure every prisoner, every guard, every staff member sees it. To send a message, this is what happens to child killers. And then there are the rumors. Rumors I can't confirm. Rumors that the Brotherhood has something planned that's far worse than death. Something that would make Chris Watts wish he'd never been born. I can't share the details here, they're too graphic, too disturbing. But multiple sources have hinted at a plan that goes beyond anything we've discussed. What I can tell you is this. Christopher Watts is living on borrowed time. Whether the Brotherhood kills him, breaks him, or does something far worse, his time is running out. And unlike Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico, he knows it's coming. Before we finish, we need to remember who this case is really about. Not Chris Watts. The victims. Shanann Watts was 34 years old. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a mother. She worked hard. She loved deeply. She believed in her family. And she died fighting for her life. The autopsy revealed that Shanann had defense wounds on her hands. She tried to fight back. She tried to protect herself. She tried to protect the son growing inside her. But she couldn't. Chris was stronger. And he was determined. Shanann's last moments were filled with betrayal, terror, and pain. She was killed by the person she trusted most in the world. I want you to remember her. Not as a victim. Not as a statistic. As a person. A woman who posted videos of her life. Who loved her daughters more than anything. Who was excited about her son. Who worked hard to provide for her family. A woman who deserves to be remembered for who she was, not how she died. Her friends said, Shanann was sunshine. She lit up every room. She made everyone feel special. And she loved those girls with everything she had. Her father said, my daughter was taken from us by someone she loved. Someone she trusted. And we'll never get her back. Type, we remember Shanann, in the comments if you're still thinking about her. Bella Watts was 4 years old. She loved unicorns. She loved dancing. She loved her little sister. And she watched her father kill Celeste before he killed her. According to Chris's confession, Bella walked in while he was smothering Celeste. She saw it. She knew what was happening. And she asked him, is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece? 4 years old. And she knew she was about to die. Chris's response? He said, yes. And then he smothered her. Bella Watts died knowing her father was her killer. Celeste Watts was 3 years old. She loved princesses. She loved singing. She loved her big sister. And she died never understanding why. Their bodies were found in oil tanks. Submerged in crude oil for days. Their father put them there. How do you process that? How do you comprehend a father murdering his own daughters? You can't. Because it's incomprehensible. But we have to remember them. Not as victims. As children who deserve to grow up. Bella should be 10 years old now. Celeste should be 9. They should be in school. Making friends. Playing sports. Living. Instead they're in a cemetery. Type Bella and Celeste mattered in the comments. Let their memory live on. And then there's Nico. Nico Lee Watts. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant when Chris killed her. Nico never got to be born. He never opened his eyes. He never took a breath. He never felt his mother's arms around him. He never existed outside the womb. Shanann had already picked out his name. She'd already started planning his nursery. She'd already imagined what he would look like, who he would become. And Chris Watts took all of that away. Nico Watts is the forgotten victim. People talk about Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. But Nico is often left out of the conversation. And that's wrong. Because Nico was a person. A life. A future. And he mattered. I want you to remember all 4 of them. Shanann. Bella. Celeste. Nico. 4 lives stolen by one man's selfishness. Type justice for the Watts family in the comments. Let them know they're not forgotten. People ask me all the time, why this case? Why Chris Watts? Why spend months investigating? Why track down sources? Why dig through thousands of documents? I'll tell you why. Because too many people still don't know the real truth behind it. They know the headlines. They know he killed his family. But they don't know what's happening to him now. They don't know about the Aryan Brotherhood. They don't know about the threats, the letters, the psychological warfare. They don't know that Christopher Watts is living in hell. And they need to know. Because this isn't just about one man's crimes. It's about justice. It's about accountability. It's about making sure the world never forgets what he did. I also chose this case because it terrifies me. As a father. As someone who lost a child. This case represents my worst nightmare. The idea that someone could look at their children and choose to end them. I can't comprehend it. And I never want to. But I also know that understanding evil is the first step to preventing it. And maybe, just maybe, by telling this story, by showing people the signs, by making sure Chris Watts never fades into obscurity, maybe we can save the next Shanann, the next Bella, the next Celeste. That's why I chose this case. And that's why I'll never stop telling their story. Before we end this, I need to talk about something critical. The warning signs. Because Chris Watts didn't just wake up one day and decide to murder his family. There were signs. And people missed them. Warning sign number 1. Emotional detachment. In the months before the murders, Chris became emotionally distant from Shanann. He stopped engaging. Stopped communicating. Stopped showing affection. If your partner suddenly becomes emotionally unavailable, that's a red flag. Warning sign number 2. Lying about small things. Chris lied constantly. About where he was, what he was doing, who he was with. Small lies often escalate to bigger lies. If someone in your life is lying about things that don't seem to matter, pay attention. Warning sign number 3. Sudden lifestyle changes. Chris started working out obsessively. Changed his appearance. Became obsessed with his image. Sudden, dramatic changes in behavior can indicate something deeper is happening. Warning sign number 4. Lack of empathy. When Shanann expressed concerns about their marriage, Chris showed no empathy, no understanding, no effort. If someone you love can't empathize with your pain, that's a massive warning sign. Warning sign number 5. Secretive behavior. Chris deleted texts, changed passwords, had secret conversations. Secrecy breeds danger. I'm not saying every person who shows these signs is a potential murderer, but I am saying, don't ignore them. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Shanann felt something was wrong, and she tried to fix it. But some people can't be fixed. Some people are too far gone. If someone in your life is showing these signs, talk to someone. Get help. Protect yourself. So how does the Chris Watts story end? Does the Aryan Brotherhood finally get to him? Does he survive 2026? Does he spend the next 40 years in that cell, slowly deteriorating? Or does something else happen? I don't know. Nobody knows. But here's what I do know. Christopher Watts will never leave prison. He will never breathe free air. He will never see his family again, not that he deserves to. He will never escape the consequences of what he did. He will die in that cell. Alone. Forgotten. Hated. And maybe that's exactly how it should end. Not with revenge. Not with violence. With loneliness. With regret. With the slow, painful realization that he destroyed everything that mattered. That's how the Chris Watts story ends. Not with a bang. With a whimper. Thank you for watching this investigation. I'll see you in the next investigation. Stay safe. Stay aware. Stay vigilant. Because evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it looks like someone you know.